Welcome to Grow Yourself Great. Before you can change the pattern, you have to understand the psychology that built it. Yesterday, everything was fine. You talked, laughed, made plans. They told you they loved you. Nothing happened. No argument, no betrayal, no breakup. Today, their text is different. Not dramatically different, just different. Yesterday, good morning, baby, with a heart. Hope you have a great day. Today, morning, have a good day. That's it. 2 fewer words. No heart, no baby. And something inside you notices immediately. You read it again. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they're tired. Maybe nothing is wrong. But now that you've noticed the difference, you can't quite unnotice it. So you start looking backward. How did they sound last night? Did the conversation end differently? Did you say something? Were they irritated? Then you look forward. What if they're pulling away? What if something changed? What if there's somebody else? Nothing has been established, but psychologically, something has already happened. Uncertainty entered the relationship, and suddenly your attention leaves what you were doing and goes looking for the other person. You check your phone, replay the conversation, read the message again, maybe send another one. Their response takes longer. Now the silence itself starts feeling informative. Are they upset? Did I do something? Are they losing interest? Are we still okay? Eventually they respond, sorry, crazy morning. Everything is fine. And almost immediately your body changes. Shoulders drop. Breathing changes. Thoughts slow down. Relief. Now pay attention, because this is where people misunderstand anxious-preoccupied attachment. You didn't necessarily need more love. You needed an answer to the uncertainty that had entered the connection. And once you received evidence that the connection remained intact, your system settled. The relationship may never have changed. Your felt security in the relationship did. And when felt security changed, your attention reorganized around restoring it. That's where we are beginning. Because anxious, preoccupied attachment isn't simply, I love hard. It isn't, I'm emotional. It isn't, I need reassurance. It isn't, I hate being alone. And it certainly isn't, I'm clingy. Those descriptions don't explain the psychology. The deeper question is, what happens inside you when somebody important still matters, but their availability, responsiveness, or commitment suddenly feels uncertain? Because anxious, preoccupied attachment becomes especially visible, not simply when connection exists, but when you are no longer sure the connection is secure. Let's get clinically clear. Attachment anxiety can be understood dimensionally. People vary in the degree to which attachment relationships activate concerns about availability, responsiveness, rejection, abandonment, and relational security. Preoccupied describes an attachment organization in which concerns about important relationships can become particularly psychologically prominent. This is not an anxiety disorder. It is not a personality disorder. It is not a DSM diagnosis. And it is not a synonym for needy, clingy, dramatic, codependent, or insecure. Those words can obscure more than they explain. Anxious, preoccupied attachment is better understood as an attachment organization in which perceived uncertainty or threat involving an important connection can strongly recruit attention, emotion, interpretation, and behavior toward monitoring or restoring felt security. In everyday language, when connection feels uncertain, it can become difficult to leave the relationship psychologically alone. You want to know what changed, what happened, what does this mean? Are we okay? What can I do? And that's why the word preoccupied matters. Preoccupied doesn't necessarily mean I think about relationships every minute of my life. You might run a company, raise children, teach classes, lead people, travel, have friends, have hobbies, function extremely well. until something happens in an important relationship. Then suddenly, your psychological bandwidth gets recruited. You were working, now you're thinking about the text. You were enjoying dinner, now you're analyzing their tone. You were watching television, now you've missed 10 minutes because you're replaying something they said 3 hours ago. Preoccupation is not necessarily constant attention to another person. It is how difficult attention can become to retrieve once attachment security feels uncertain. That's different. And that distinction matters. Before we go further, we need to stop pathologizing human attachment. Human beings need people. Adults still need connection, belonging, comfort, support, affection, responsiveness, reassurance, and co-regulation. Secure people need those things too. Wanting someone to call you back isn't pathology. Missing your partner isn't pathology. Wanting reassurance isn't pathology. Being hurt when somebody important becomes distant isn't pathology. The question is not simply, do I need connection? The more revealing question is, what begins happening inside me when I'm no longer certain the connection is available? That's where we need to separate three things: attachment need, attachment anxiety, and attachment behavior. An attachment need might be, I want reassurance. And an attachment anxiety might be, I'm afraid something changed between us. Attachment behavior is what you do next. Maybe you ask directly. Maybe you call repeatedly. Maybe you check their social media. Maybe you overexplain. Maybe you apologize. Maybe you accommodate. Maybe you test. Maybe you become angry. Maybe you pursue. Those are not all the same psychological event. And that matters because having a need does not tell us how securely you will respond when the need becomes vulnerable. Secure functioning isn't becoming needless. It is developing more flexibility in what happens when needs cannot immediately be satisfied. Attachment begins before you can explain attachment. A child doesn't sit in the crib thinking, I'm evaluating caregiver responsiveness and constructing an internal working model. But learning is happening. The child signals, someone responds. The child becomes distressed, something happens next. The child explores, looks back, returns, needs comfort, needs protection, needs help regulating. And across thousands of interactions, the developing system begins organizing expectations. But attachment development is not, your parent did X, therefore you became Y. That's too simplistic. Children arrive with biology, temperament, sensitivity, reactivity, different thresholds for stimulation and distress. Then they develop inside environments containing caregivers, siblings, culture, stress, resources, loss, illness, relationship dynamics, mental health, community, and countless experiences. So attachment develops transactionally. The outside contributes experiences. The inside organizes those experiences. Repeated experiences contribute to expectation, and expectation begins influencing what the developing person anticipates from connection. Now imagine that for a particular developing child. Availability or responsiveness does not become sufficiently predictable, not necessarily absent. That's important. Sometimes connection is deeply available. Sometimes less available. Sometimes distress brings responsiveness. Sometimes stronger distress brings more responsiveness. Sometimes the caregiver is loving but overwhelmed. Sometimes present physically but emotionally preoccupied. Sometimes life itself interferes with consistency. The child isn't writing a theory about any of this. The developing system is adapting. And one possible adaptation is pay attention to connection. Notice changes. Stay close. Signal. Escalate if necessary. Restore proximity. Don't assume availability. Monitor it. Here is the developmental idea I want you to remember. When connection cannot be confidently assumed, connection may become something the developing system learns to monitor. And something that begins as adaptation can eventually become expectation. At first, the uncertainty may actually exist outside the child. Will somebody come? Will somebody respond? Will connection remain? But repeated experiences don't stay outside us. They contribute to expectations. And eventually, something that happens today encounters everything you've learned about what things like it might mean. Your partner gets quiet. That's today. But quiet enters the mind that already has a history with quiet. Maybe quiet historically meant anger, withdrawal, punishment, disappointment, someone preparing to leave. So before you know why this person is quiet, your body may already be preparing for what quiet has meant before. That's why attachment is not simply memory. It becomes anticipation. And anticipation affects perception. What happened before can influence what you expect next. But clinically, we have to be careful. That does not mean everything you are concerned about is your childhood. Sometimes your partner really is withdrawing. Sometimes somebody really has changed. Sometimes you notice something accurately. Attachment theory should never teach you to ignore reality. The work is learning to distinguish. What am I observing? What am I interpreting? What am I predicting? Those are not identical. Now we need a word, hyperactivation. Don't let the clinical language make this complicated. Something threatens felt security. And instead of attention moving away from attachment, attention identifies toward it. The system initially says, stay with this, figure it out, restore connection. So you notice more, think more, check more, replay more, seek more information, seek reassurance, move closer, try to repair, try to resolve, try to reduce the uncertainty. That's hyperactivation. And now a lot of behaviors that looked random begin making sense. Why reread the message? You are searching for information. Why replay the conversation? Searching. Why check your social media? Searching. Why ask, are we okay? Searching. Why over-explain? Trying to prevent misunderstanding from becoming distance. Why apologize quickly? Trying to restore connection. Why pursue when somebody pulls away? Trying to reduce relational threat. The behaviors can be different, but the organizing movement is similar toward restoring attachment security. That's why anxious preoccupied attachment is different from simply being anxious. The anxiety is organized around something, connection. This may be one of the deepest costs of preoccupation. You don't necessarily physically chase anybody. Your attention does. You are sitting at dinner, but psychologically, you're somewhere else. You're asking, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? Why haven't they responded? Are they upset? Did something change? How do I fix it? And while your attention is intensely tracking them, something else can become harder to hear. You. What do I feel? What do I need? Do I even like what is happening? Does this relationship work for me? What are my standards? What is my boundary? What do I actually want? That's why anxious preoccupied attachment isn't merely about being too focused on another person. There's a deeper danger. The relationship can become so psychologically loud that your relationship with yourself gets quieter. And that can happen without you noticing. Some people with anxious attachment tendencies become remarkably attentive to interpersonal cues, tone, facial expression, body language, response time, routine, energy. The difference between good night, and sometimes you're right, that's important. Hyper-attunement does not mean hallucination. You may accurately notice something changed, but detecting change and interpreting change are different abilities. You noticed they were quiet, observation. They are angry with me. Interpretation. You notice the text was shorter. Observation. They're losing interest. Interpretation. You notice they wanted space. Observation. They're preparing to leave. Prediction. 3 different psychological events. Being good at detecting change does not automatically make you good at determining what the change means. That's where secure functioning enters. Not stop noticing, but notice without automatically turning every observation into a conclusion. Your partner comes home irritated. Before they explain, you start reviewing yourself. What did I do? Did I forget something? Was I supposed to call? Are they mad at me? Think about that. Another person had an emotion, and your mind opened an investigation into your behavior. Why? Because when connection is highly salient, another person's emotional state can begin feeling like information about relational security. Their mood isn't just they're having an experience. It becomes, what does their experience mean about us? And sometimes, what does this mean about me? Secure differentiation asks a remarkably useful question. Is this happening in them, between us, or inside me? Maybe they're stressed, them. Maybe there really is unresolved conflict between us. Maybe their stress activated your fear of disconnection inside me. Sometimes more than one is true, but they are not automatically the same location. You ask, are we okay? They say, absolutely, relief. And people say, see, reassurance doesn't work. No, it worked beautifully. That's why this can become complicated. Uncertainty, distress, ask reassurance, relief. Then another uncertainty, ask reassurance, relief. Eventually, the mind learns something. When uncertainty hurts, reassurance helps. That's not stupidity. That's learning. The problem emerges when reassurance becomes the primary regulatory answer to relational uncertainty. Now the next ambiguous cue requires fresh evidence. Yesterday's I love you doesn't completely answer today's delayed text. Today's reassurance doesn't permanently ensure tomorrow. And eventually, another person's words may be repeatedly asked to settle something that doesn't stay settled internally. Here's the distinction. Sometimes reassurance doesn't fail. It works so efficiently that your system learns to return to it whenever uncertainty reappears. So secure functioning isn't stop asking for reassurance. It's, can reassurance be one place security comes from without becoming the only place security lives? This is where we go deeper. Do you still want me? May contain another question. Am I worth wanting? Why didn't you choose me? May contain what was wrong with me. Promise you won't leave. May contain, could I survive being left? Tell me exactly what you are thinking. May contain, can I tolerate not knowing? These questions overlap, but they are not identical. Your partner can answer, do I love you? They cannot permanently answer, am I lovable? They can say, I choose you. They cannot become the sole source of your sense that you are worth choosing. They can reassure you about today. They cannot eliminate uncertainty from tomorrow. Sometimes relationships become exhausted because another person is repeatedly being asked to externally answer a question that cannot remain settled until some part of it is answered internally. That doesn't mean you don't need them. It means there are some questions love can answer, and some questions love can support you while you learn to answer. You send a message. Then what I meant was another paragraph. I don't want you to think another. I'm only saying this because now you've written an essay. Why? Maybe you're thorough, but sometimes misunderstanding feels dangerous because if they misunderstand, they might become upset. If they're upset, they might pull away. So you keep explaining until you try to close every possible opening for misinterpretation. Now explanation isn't only communication. it's protection. Sometimes you're not explaining because your meaning is unclear. You're trying to explain yourself so completely that misunderstanding cannot create distance. But intimacy requires accepting something difficult. You cannot completely control how another mind interprets you. Sometimes secure functioning sounds like I've clarified what I meant. They may still feel differently. And difference does not automatically mean disconnection. Someone is upset. You immediately say, I'm sorry. What did you do? You don't know yet. But tension entered the connection, and your system wants it gone. So responsibility gets accepted before responsibility has been established. Now here's the important distinction. Sometimes I'm sorry means I understand what I did and I'm taking responsibility. Other times I'm sorry quietly means please stop being upset so I know we're okay again. Those are not the same apology. Secure functioning allows another person's disappointment to exist long enough for you to determine what happened, what belongs to them, what belongs to me, what belongs between us. You can care about somebody's hurt without automatically making yourself the cause of it. Where do you want to eat? Anywhere. What do you want to do? Whatever you want. What do you think? I'm good either way. Easy going. Maybe. But eventually, we need to ask, where are you? Because sometimes accommodation isn't simply generosity. Sometimes preference itself feels risky. If I tell you what I want, you might disagree. If you disagree, there may be tension. So I eliminate the problem early. I stop bringing myself into the negotiation. Now everybody thinks we are extremely compatible, because nobody can disagree with preferences I never revealed. Sometimes accommodation looks like compatibility, but nobody can reject a version of you that never fully enters the room. That's expensive because you can become exceptional at maintaining connection while becoming increasingly difficult to locate inside it. They ask, can you help me Saturday? You're exhausted. You don't want to, but sure. Why? Because no might disappoint them. No might change their mood. No might create distance. So yes feels safer until the yeses accumulate and eventually resentment appears. Now here's the paradox. A yes given primarily to prevent disconnection can eventually create the resentment that produces disconnection. Externally, you preserved connection. Internally, you moved farther away. Secure functioning isn't agreeing more. Sometimes it's becoming secure enough to say no and discovering the relationship did not disappear because I disappointed somebody. You explain, they say, I understand. You explain again, they say, I heard you. You explain another way. Why? Maybe they don't understand, but maybe they do. They just disagree or need time or haven't given you the response you hoped for. And somewhere, communication quietly became pursuit. Communication says, I want you to understand what I'm experiencing. Pursuit can become, I need you to respond in a particular way before I can settle. That's a subtle line. Sometimes communication ends and pursuit begins when being heard is no longer enough. You also need the person's response to regulate what being heard was supposed to resolve. Secure functioning allows you understand me and you still disagree to exist in the same relationship. They say, I need tonight to myself. Tonight, 8 hours. But your mind hears they're pulling away. Then something's wrong. Then maybe they don't want this anymore. 8 hours just became the future of the relationship. That's what attachment anxiety can do to scale. Temporary distance becomes imagined permanent loss. So here's a simple but powerful secure functioning practice. Keep the event the size it actually is. Tonight means tonight. A delayed response means a delayed response. A disagreement means a disagreement. A bad mood means a bad mood until evidence establishes something larger. Don't make tomorrow answer for what is only happening today. You want them to call, so you stop calling. You want reassurance, so you become cold. You want them closer. You say, whatever, do what you want. You want, please show me that I matter, but your behavior communicates stay away. Why? Because directly saying I miss you is vulnerable. I need reassurance, vulnerable. I felt disconnected today, vulnerable. Protest allows the need to remain disguised. But now the other person has to decode a need hidden inside behavior that may actually push them away. The need underneath the behavior can be connection, while the behavior itself makes connection harder. Secure functioning isn't less courageous because it sounds simple. Sometimes I miss you requires far more security than I don't care anymore. This distinction matters. Both patterns can experience significant attachment anxiety, but the organizing tendencies can differ. With anxious preoccupied functioning, when connection feels threatened, the predominant movement often intensifies toward restoring connection. Monitor, seek, pursue, clarify, reassure, restore. With dismissive avoidant tendencies, attachment vulnerability may more often activate deactivating strategies, minimize, suppress, distance, emphasize independence, reduce attachment-related engagement. With fearful avoidant patterns, the person may experience stronger competing movements. Come closer, but closeness itself becomes threatening. Go away, but distance becomes threatening too. Approach, avoid, want, fear. These are not rigid boxes. People are complex. Context matters. Attachment is dimensional. But understanding the organizing tendencies prevents us from calling every relationship difficulty. Anxious attachment. You spend months asking, do they want me? Do they like me? Are they serious? Are they going to stay? Will they choose me? Then somebody asks, do you actually like them? And strangely, you haven't spent nearly as much time on that question. Do their values fit yours? Do you feel respected? Do you enjoy who you become around them? Are they emotionally available? Do they communicate in ways that work for you? Do you actually want this relationship? Because when being chosen carries enormous psychological significance, compatibility can become secondary. When you are preoccupied with whether somebody will choose you, you cannot forget that you are also supposed to be choosing them. Secure functioning restores your vote, not how do I become impossible to leave, but while you are deciding whether I fit your life, I'm deciding whether you fit mine. This is where attachment becomes interpersonal. You sense distance, you pursue. They feel pressured. They take more space. Their space increases your anxiety. You pursue harder. They withdraw farther. Now you think, see, I knew they were pulling away. And they think, see, this is why I need space. Be careful. This does not mean anxious people cause avoidance. It does not mean another person's withdrawal is your fault. It means relationships contain feedback loops. Your attachment response becomes part of the other person's relational environment, and theirs becomes part of yours. A strategy designed to restore security can sometimes change the interaction in ways that create even more insecurity. That's why understanding attachment cannot stop at what do I feel? Eventually, we have to ask, what does my way of trying to feel safe create for the person on the other side of me? Maybe you learned early to notice, monitor, anticipate, stay connected, read emotional shifts, repair quickly, accommodate. Maybe attention helped. Maybe staying close helped. Maybe stronger signaling sometimes produce more responsiveness. Maybe understanding everybody else's emotional world helped you navigate yours. So I don't want you leaving this masterclass thinking something is wrong with me. That's not the lesson. The lesson is what eventually feels like personality may partly contain strategies practiced so early and so often that they stop feeling like strategies. They're real. They're part of you. They may have helped you. And now you get to examine whether every situation still requires them. A strategy can deserve gratitude for what it helped you survive without receiving permanent authority over how you live. That's growth. The solution to anxious preoccupied attachment is not stop caring, stop needing, stop reaching, become distant, never ask for reassurance, never depend on anybody. That's not security. That's just moving to another extreme. Secure functioning develops range. Can I notice a change without immediately deciding what it means? Can I ask for reassurance without requiring reassurance to become my only regulatory strategy? Can I miss somebody without interpreting every absence as abandonment? Can I express a preference and survive disagreement? Can I say no and tolerate somebody else's disappointment? Can I let another person have an emotion without automatically making myself responsible for fixing it? Can I communicate without pursuing until I receive the response I wanted? Can I ask directly for closeness instead of protesting my way toward it? Can I remain curious long enough to distinguish observation from interpretation? And perhaps most importantly, can I stay connected to you without leaving myself to maintain the connection? That's secure functioning. Not by standing in front of a mirror saying, I'm secure. Not by fighting every anxious thought. Not by shaming yourself when you want reassurance. Attachment learning developed through experience. New experience matters too. One unanswered text that you allowed to remain unanswered a little longer before writing the ending yourself. One shorter response that you noticed without immediately interpreting. I need reassurance today, said directly. One preference expressed. One no given. One no received. One disagreement, followed by reconnection. One night of space that actually remains one night. One moment when somebody is disappointed in you and you discover you are still loved. One moment when somebody's mood changes and you ask, is this happening in them, between us, or inside me? One moment when you notice yourself asking, do they want me? And remember to ask, do I want them? One moment when uncertainty arrives, and instead of immediately leaving yourself to chase certainty, you remain with yourself while reality develops. That's how new evidence accumulates, not through force, through experience. Security grows when your system repeatedly discovers that uncertainty, difference, disappointment, distance, and vulnerability do not always produce relational catastrophe. Anxious, preoccupied attachment gets reduced to you need too much reassurance. No, that's too shallow. Underneath the reassurance may be uncertainty. Underneath the uncertainty may be anticipation. Underneath the anticipation may be an attachment system that learned connection matters enough that changes in connection deserve immediate attention. And that adaptation may have made extraordinary sense. Maybe attention helped you stay connected. Maybe monitoring helped you anticipate emotional shifts. Maybe accommodation reduced conflict. Maybe reassurance restored security. Maybe pursuit brought somebody back. The question isn't, why am I like this? As an accusation, the better question is, what did this way of functioning help me accomplish? And what does it cost me now? Because there is a cost when your attention repeatedly leaves you. to find somebody else. There's a cost when their mood determines your worth, when their silence determines your peace, when their reassurance has to repeatedly rebuild security from scratch, when their disappointment automatically becomes your responsibility, when being chosen becomes more important than choosing, when you become so busy maintaining a relationship that nobody is maintaining your relationship with yourself. And that's why secure functioning isn't learning to love less. It isn't becoming indifferent. It isn't saying, I don't need anybody. It is developing the capacity to remain relational without making the relationship responsible for carrying your entire internal world. Maybe they reassure you, and their reassurance matters. Maybe they comfort you, and their comfort helps. Maybe you reach for them. That's attachment. That's human. But there are now more places for security to live. There's reassurance, your self-regulation, reality, evidence, direct communication, boundaries, self-trust, your ability to tolerate uncertainty, your knowledge that disappointment is survivable, your ability to remain yourself while somebody else has an emotional experience. And slowly, something begins changing. A shorter text can remain a shorter text until you know more. A bad mood can belong to them until you know it belongs between you. Tonight can remain tonight instead of becoming forever. A disagreement can remain disagreement instead of becoming abandonment. A no can remain no without becoming you don't love me. And reassurance can be received without immediately being placed on the expiration time. You still care. You still need. You still reach. You still love deeply. But your attention doesn't have to abandon you every time connection becomes uncertain. And maybe that's the deepest movement from anxious, preoccupied functioning toward greater security. Not, I finally know you will never leave. No relationship can honestly give you that certainty. But I no longer have to leave myself trying to make sure you don't. And maybe even deeper, I can let you matter enormously without making every change in you an emergency inside me. That's not caring less. That's developing more capacity to care without disappearing into the caring. Because secure functioning doesn't require you to stop reaching for people. It helps you remain present with yourself while you reach. And when you can do that, the relationship no longer has to answer every question about your worth. Another person's mood doesn't automatically become your assignment. Uncertainty doesn't automatically become danger. And love doesn't have to be continuously inspected to remain real. Understanding your psychology matters. It helps you understand the patterns shaping your life. Understand clearly. Integrate deeply. Grow yourself great.